Well, good evening. The time being 6:45, the committee will resume. And Senator Urquhart, I believe you are seeking the call.
Yes. Thank you, Chair. Okay. Minister, I might start with you. On the 12th of August, Paul Fletcher, in a morning Twitter tirade, stated the following: "Had we not abandoned Labor's disastrous NBN plan, which would have taken 6 to 8 years longer to complete, around 4.5 million Australian homes and businesses in the fixed line footprint would be unable to connect to the NBN." Can you tell me what is the source of the minister's claim that Labor's original fibre rollout would take 6 to 8 years longer?
Senator, thank you for that. I'll have to take the details of the question on notice, except to say that that doesn't sound like a Twitter tirade to me. That sounds like a press release, and I think that you're being a little subjective.
It was a Twitter tirade.
Well, if it was on Twitter, then it was a tweet. It wasn't necessarily a tirade.
So you don't know
I've taken it
what
on
that
notice.
claim? Thank you. Mr Windeyer, was that referenced by the minister based on a departmental brief?
I would have to take that on notice. Not that I'm aware of, Senator, but I would have to take that on notice.
Minister, are you aware that Stephen Rue, Bill Morrow and Mike Quigley have all given evidence to the parliament that this claim is nonsense and the figures are not even a costing or modelling of a Labor policy?
No, that's news to me, Senator.
Are you aware that they were in fact a costing of what would happen if you happened to be illogical enough to deploy a multi-technology mix, absorb massive cost blowouts and then decide to go back and overbuild that network with fibre?
Was that Mr Quigley?
No, that was you.
That was me.
No, that's a question I'm asking you.
I'm sorry, I didn't actually understand the question.
Are you aware that they were in fact a costing of what would happen if you happened to be illogical enough to deploy a multi-technology mix, absorb massive cost blowouts and then decide to go back and overbuild that network with fibre?
I'm afraid I haven't actually seen those quotes. If you could table them, that would be very helpful.
Does that ring a bell? Are you aware of any government
No,
act
but if you
in that
table them,
plan?
that would be terrific.
Sorry?
If you could table them so we could reference them, that would be very helpful.
I will get copies of them. Where does the minister's claim that 4.5 million premises come from? I'm happy for the minister or Mr Windeyer to answer that.
I think we took that on notice, didn't we?
No, not that one.
Sorry, which?
I didn't. That was your first question, Senator Urquhart.
No, my first question was the source about the claim that Labor's original fibre rollout would take 6 to 8 years longer. I'm now saying, where does the minister's claim that 4.5 million premises come from? What's the source of that figure?
I'll have to take
How
that
do
on
you
notice
get to
unless the
4.5
department has
million?
that information.
Without some context, Senator, I'm not sure from where is that figure?
It was a tweet.
tirade.
It's related back to the tweet that I spoke about earlier.
Senator, without seeing the context, I'm not sure I can help you with that.
Mr Windeyer, was that 4.5 million based on a departmental briefing?
Well, Senator, I'm not sure what the 4.5 million premises is.
The minister claimed that 4.5 million premises
In a tweet, is this?
would be without... I'll read the tweet out again just so that you've got the context of the questions. So the tweet said, "Had we not abandoned Labor's disastrous NBN plan, which would have taken 6 to 8 years longer to complete, around 4.5 million Australian homes and businesses in the fixed line footprint would be unable to connect to the NBN." That's the context of the thing.
Senator, that sounds to me like something that would be in a strategic review.
4.5 million.
2013.
It's in a strategic review, is it?
Is that the revised outlook in the strategic review?
Sorry?
Does that sound... I think I'm asking the department.
I don't know. I'm asking the questions. I'm asking Mr Windeyer, was that... where did that claim come from? Was it actually based on departmental briefings?
So the answer on that point of whether it was based on departmental briefings, not that I'm aware of, Senator, but I would have to take that on notice to confirm. But I think
Senator, I'm just having a look through the strategic review from December 2013, which was undertaken by NBN Co, and that does refer to a peak funding requirement that will be in the order of $72.6 billion with a completion date of around about 2024.
Sorry, that's got nothing to do with the 4.5 million homes, Mr Madsen. I thought you were going to point out something about the 4.5 million homes.
I think it was referencing the earlier number, but we'll take that on notice as to whether.
Sorry, you think he was referencing
I
what?
think he was answering my question for me, which was very kind. I think.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, the minister can, I'm sure, go and ask you questions at any time. But so what's interesting is that on the 9th of October 2019, at a speech to CEDA, the minister said the following: a multi-technology mix that would be delivered 5 years faster than the original plan and would save taxpayers $30 billion. So can you tell me what is the source for the minister's claim there about 5 years? And why is it 5 years in that speech?
Senator, I'm not sure whether we know the source of those figures, but I'm happy to take that on notice and see if we provided advice on the figures for that speech.
So do you provide advice to the minister at all on these sorts of detail? Department?
We provide the minister with advice on all manner of things, Senator. I just don't know off the top of my head whether we provided advice on those particular figures used in that speech.
Well, I'm really interested to know if the minister prepared a speech. Who would normally draw up the speech for the minister? Would it come out of the department? Would it come from the minister's office? Would you provide advice and information, facts and figures?
It depends, Minister. It can involve some input from the department. It can involve considerable input from the minister's office. So it depends.
So you don't have any idea where the issue around that 5 years faster would have come from?
No, Senator. The only thing I would point to is the point Mr Madsen raised, which is there is the strategic review from 2013, which had some figures in it, but whether those are the figures that were used in that speech, I'm not sure.
Is there a figure of 5 years in that document, Mr Madsen?
We are just checking, Senator.
Well, maybe while Mr Madsen's checking, Senator Hume, maybe could you seek clarification from the Minister's office exactly where that figure comes from?
Okay.
Are you able to do that?
I think the answer will be the NBN strategic review from December 2013.
You think?
Well, we've already taken it on notice, Senator.
Yeah, no, I understand that, but I don't. I mean, you've taken it on notice. Senator Hume has said she will seek clarification from the Minister's office where that detail came from. So, Mr Windier, you don't know whether the department drafted that aspect of the speech?
No, I don't, Senator. I'm happy to take that on notice as well.
So what's also a source of great intrigue is that on the 12th of May 2020 and the 7th of June 2020, the Minister made the following claim, and I'll quote, "We committed to a turnaround with the NBN to be rolled out 4 years more quickly and for $30 billion less than under Labor's plan." So can you tell me what is the source for that claim? And hopefully your memory goes back to May
Senator,
and June of this year.
That is in the strategic review 2013.
Senator, I think there are two potential sources. One is the strategic review that we have referred to in 2013, and the other is NBN's corporate plan in 2015, which references the cost for the company to complete the build based on a fibre-to-the-premises network. And it talks about the network then being completed in 2026, but possibly as late as 2028, with a peak funding range of between $74 and $84 billion.
Okay, can you tell me what's the cost of the multi-technology mix in the strategic review?
If you bear with me, I'll see if I can find that for you.
Senator, would it be all right if we continued to have taken that?
Sorry, Mr Atkins.
Sorry, we took...
No, you haven't taken this. This is a separate question. This is the cost of the multi-technology mix in the strategic review.
So the strategic review is a publicly available document.
Yeah, I'm
you
asking.
could table it if you like.
I'm here to ask the questions, and the officer is actually looking.
I'm just. If you would like the whole review,
I'm comfortable to
you can then look through it at your own
Mr
leisure.
Madsen find the detail.
It's an 80-page document. So.
I'm sure Mr Madsen's looked at it many, many times. In fact, he could probably read it out in his sleep.
Senator, if my recollection of the report is correct, the multi-technology mix is based on scenario 6 in the strategic review, and the report refers to a peak funding of $41 billion.
Okay. So, Mr Madsen, Mr Morrow, Mr Rule and Mr Quigley have all said that the counterfactual in the 2016 corporate plan is not a costing of Labor policy. Are you aware of that?
My understanding of the costing that I referenced earlier from NBN's corporate plan is that it was a cost for the company to...
Sorry, Mr Madsen, I didn't ask you what the costing was. I said, are you aware that Mr Morrow, Mr Rue and Mr Quigley have all said that the counterfactual in the 2016 corporate plan is not a costing of Labor policy? Are you aware of that?
Table those quotes. It would be very helpful for us to be
Are
able to
you
put them
aware
into
of that?
context, because otherwise we just have to take your word for it that they've all said exactly the
I'm
same
sorry,
thing.
I thought I had the call and I was asking Mr Madsen.
I'm just asked for a clarification.
and he
You
was
quoted
actually...
3 people with exactly the same quote.
That's
I think
right.
I think we're entitled to see those quotes in their context.
Yes, and I said we will get them.
Well,
They're
how
on their
can
way
you-
up.
I'm sorry, how can
Mr Madsen was
answer the
actually...
question?
Mr Madsen was answering the question. If you'd like to continue, Mr Madsen.
Senator, my understanding of the figures that are quoted in the NBN 2015 corporate plan are that they estimate the costs of the company at that point reverting to building the network using an all fibre to the premises technology.
Okay. So I'll go back to the Minister's repeated claim that the Coalition's second-rate NBN has cost $30 billion less than Labor's original fibre plan. Can you tell me the source of that claim?
Sorry,
Is that
Senator,
in the strategic review as well?
Sorry, Senator, did you just quote the Minister as saying that the multi-technology mix was second rate?
No.
So what did the Minister exactly say and in what context?
No. I said I referred to the Minister's repeated claim that the Coalition's second-rate NBN has cost $30 billion less than Labor's original fibre plan.
I don't think the Minister said that the Coalition
No,
has a
sorry,
second-rate
I
NBN.
read that round the wrong way. But basically, I'm saying it's the Coalition's second-rate NBN.
When did the Minister say that?
Sorry, the Minister has repeatedly claimed on a number of occasions that the NBN has cost $30 billion less than Labor's original fibre plan. He says it all the time. He says it out in the media, he says it in speeches, he says it in a whole range of things.
A little bit of context would be helpful, I think, if you could, identify when
I just want to know the source of that $30 billion
Well, I'd like to
claim.
know the source of the quote that you're claiming has been said.
It's been said on a number of occasions.
If you could just cite it in Hansard, that would be fantastic, or, a media clip would be
All
terrific.
right, I'll get that information. Okay, I will move past that and I will come back. So I've got some... so there was a tweet... sorry, I'm just looking for the dates. I'll try and get them printed out if I can, but it might take me a couple of minutes. Hang on. So on the 12th of August... 12th of August, Paul Fletcher tweeted, "Had we not abandoned Labor's disastrous NBN plan, which would have taken 6 to 8 years longer to complete, around 4.5 million Australian homes and businesses in the fixed line footprint would be unable to connect to the NBN, depriving millions of Australians or Aussies the ability to work and learn from home. That was a tweet on the 12th of August.
Sorry, Senator, I've got an answer for you. On page 113 of the Strategic Review, it says, at this level of peak funding, the Strategic Review found the cost of the multi-technology optimised model to be significantly lower than the peak funding estimated for the revised Outlook rollout of $73 billion.
So what was that page again?
113.
So that's where, is that where you're saying to me that the 6 to 8 years longer, the 4.5 billion homes,
That was
million
the information you
homes?
asked me to ask of the Minister's office.
Beg your pardon?
That was the information you asked me to ask of the Minister's office.
Okay, so that was the source of the Minister's claim that Labor's original fibre rollout would take 6 to 8 years.
I don't think that was years. I think that was the revised Outlook rollout of $73 billion. What does it say? No, that was about costs.
Sorry, the only question you took was
This
the
was
very
an
first
assessment done in
question.
2013.
Is that the
And
strategic
it was a
review?
conservative estimate on how much Labor's NBN would cost.
Is it
yes.
the strategic review?
Yes, it is.
What-
Page 113. So I'll
Right,
direct you
so-
to that.
So that's in relation to that first question that I asked you,
Yes.
which was the rollout taking 6 to 8 years longer.
I think you asked me about costs.
I asked you about that, and then, so you don't have an answer on the other one?
Would you like me to source an answer on the other one? I
Well,
did take it on notice.
I thought you had taken that on notice.
Yes,
You did?
but you didn't ask me to go back to the Minister's office immediately and get you an answer, which I did for the other question.
Okay. Ms Hume, can you tell me, Senator Hume, sorry, can you tell me what the 2013 strategic review assumes the multi-technology mix would cost?
No, I haven't got it in front of me.
Right.
Senator, that's
Mr.
the one I
Madsen?
quoted to you earlier.
And what was that again?
$41 billion.
Okay. And what has the multi-technology mix actually ended up costing?
So if we go to NBN's 2021 corporate plan, it says on page 52 that...
Sorry, you're on the corporate plan, not the strategic review?
That's correct.
Yeah.
It says that including completion of the initial rollout, the NBN network has been consistent with the $51 billion financing requirement.
So that's what it's actually ended up costing?
That's correct.
How much was that again?
$51 billion.
$51 billion?
Yes, for the initial rollout.
And the initial rollout. What about the what is it now?
Well, I think as we spoke
What is
about...
it in? Because I guess my question
It's at
was
the volume
what
rollout
has...
now.
Sorry?
It's now, effectively.
Yes.
The volume rollout.
I can't... sorry.
Sorry, it's now.
It's $51 billion now. That's what it has ended up costing?
It's the end of the volume rollout.
Yes.
So as it... over the last 9 years, the company has been deploying the high volume rollout of the network.
Yes.
Installing, I think, around about an average of 40,000 premises a month. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I'm referring to in terms of the initial rollout. Okay. I think now we would say that the initial rollout has been completed and that the company has transitions into its operational phase. And so that's the distinction that I'm making.
Okay, so in the 2013 strategic review, it was $41 billion.
Yes.
And it is now, at the end of the volume rollout, it is $51 billion. And so, what is it now? Because my question was, what was the actual end up cost? What did it end up costing?
So the corporate plan 2021.
I mean, yesterday we established that the peak funding is going up to $57 billion. That was correct, Mr Windier, wasn't it? We established that yesterday. That was correct. That's what you said yesterday.
I think we established that the peak funding related to the volume rollout, and that further investment beyond that.
But that figure was 57. So where does the gap between 51 and 57, what is that?
It's additional activity, Senator.
Yeah,
Okay.
beyond the volume.
So that's up to now?
No, that's in future.
So in NBN's, again in its 2021 corporate plan, it has announced an additional $6 billion of expenditure to expand ultra-fast broadband services out to 75% of fixed line services, to deploy high-speed fibre services to 90% of businesses, and to undertake other activities such as enhancing its IT capability, the funding the COVID relief package and the CVC boost that it has offered to its customers over the last 8 months. And so those additional expenditures are now within the corporate plan period out to 2024, but they represent investments the company is making in its future operations that will build on the initial rollout and enable the company to meet the growing demand for broadband, high-speed broadband services.
So that $6 billion that you just talked about in the 2021 corporate plan, so that is added to the $51 billion to get the 57 that we established yesterday. Is that correct?
That's correct.
That's right.
Right.
Yes.
So has that been spent?
No, that's the total funding.
That's forward for how long?
Out to the period of the current corporate plan, out to 30 June 2024.
So that's for further investment beyond the end of the volume rollout period, which is what the peak funding was with respect to.
Right, but isn't the minister's statement assuming that the multi-technology mix costs $41 billion? Not
That's the figure in the strategic review. If I recall correctly, from that point, the company's published corporate plans would have referred to a peak funding. What's the word I'm looking for?
They documented a range.
Yes, the peak funding range for roughly $46 billion up to mid-50s. So, based on the work that was undertaken in the strategic review, the company developed its further corporate plan, which set out a peak funding range, which is not unusual for a large infrastructure build where there are likely to be variations as the construction occurs. And over successive corporate plans, the company has provided updates on the build and progressively narrowed down that peak funding range, and which results in the peak funding figure that's in the 2021 corporate plan for completing the initial rollout.
Right. So if I can just go back to the comments of the Minister, but Mr Madsen, I just want to be really clear here. So when the Minister claims that the multi-technology mix saves the $30 million, which is where he says that, you know, it's costing more, our plan, Labor's plan is would be $30 billion more, or effectively he's saying the government's plan is $30 billion less. So when the Minister claims that the multi-technology mix saves $30 billion, he is assuming that the cost of the multi-technology mix is $41 billion. But that's not the cost, because the peak funding is now going up to 57.
So there's a couple of things there just to add in. Is that quote was from the Strategic Review 2013, which was, as I understand it, the last time there was a proper side-by-side comparison of the two models. And so that was the reference point where the two were looked at together. And then there's variability in project rollout, and I'm not sure whether there's been another update of the two things on an apples-for-apples basis since then. What we have is the current cost of the...
Sorry, Mr Atkinson, when you say side-by-side comparison, just what do you mean by that?
I suppose the strategic review looked at different options for completing the network build at that time.
Right.
And it evaluated the option of continuing with the all fibre to the premises construction or adopting a number of alternatives, one of which was the multi-technology model, which was eventually adopted by the company.
Right. So if I then go back to that claim, sorry?
I was going to say, Senator, just to be clear, the scenario that the 57 billion relates to is not a scenario contemplated in the strategic review.
The which one, sorry?
The 57 billion scenario. As we've said, the 57 billion relates to the volume rollout at 51 billion plus new activity. And the strategic review was not contemplating at that point in time any of the additional activity. So the 57 billion package, as it were, was not contemplated or being in the context of the strategic review.
That was written in 2013?
Correct.
Yeah, no, I understand that. So Mr Madsen, just getting back to the point about the Minister's statement, assuming that the multi-technology mist costed 41 billion, isn't that reference point is wrong, starting at 41 billion, because the multi-technology mix does not cost 41 billion, does it? It actually costs more.
Well, I've just explained. I've just referenced the figures in NBN's corporate plan where they describe it's costing 51 billion.
Yes.
The side-by-side bit becomes really important because of the time value of money, right? And in this point, this was done in 2013 and we're now in 2020.
Yes. Okay, so the strategic review did not contemplate a $16 billion cost blowout, did it?
I think Mr Windy just explained.
Mr Madsen, can I just ask Mr Madsen if he could just answer that question? He's quoted the figures out of the strategic review. It didn't contemplate a $16 billion cost blowout, did it, Mr Madsen?
I think we're not professing to be able to quote you directly every element of the strategic review. I think we would need to go and review it again and refresh our memory. I'd be surprised if it doesn't reference the fact that it's forecasting network expenditure for different options over a long period of time, and there's a probability of there being some variation in the actual cost
Mr
of
Madsen,
each
you've
of
been
those
around
options.
for a fair while and you know that strategic review, so I wouldn't have thought that was a very difficult question to answer, and I'm not sure why you won't or can't answer it. The fact that it's a very simple question, the strategic review did not contemplate a $16 billion blowout, did it?
Senator,
Could you just answer the question just for once?
I think I've answered that question. I think it's a document from 2013 and there's a lot that's happened since that time.
I don't think Mr Madsen is trying to be evasive, Senator Urquhart. I think he's questioning the premise of your
That might
question.
be your opinion.
Well, I'm just trying
your
to
opinion,
assist
Minister.
you to find the right answer.
Neither you nor I can dictate how an official
I
answers
understand
the question,
that.
so
I just
please
would like
move
the
on.
question answered. Anyway, I'll move on. So, can I just go back to that claim that the Minister repeatedly says, and I will
You're
get...
sourcing that for us.
Sorry?
The claim that the Minister repeatedly says you're sourcing that for us.
Yeah, I will get that. I just don't have it with me at the moment, but I'm just really interested to know where that $30 billion figure came out. But look, I might get that information first and come back to that if I can, if time allows. So I've got some questions to the department in relation to Australia Post. So is Mr. Rush... You into them? Okay, I'll go on. I'll go and see if I can print it.
Available, please.
Ms Rush?
Is it Mr Rush? Sorry, who is the Assistant Secretary?
We had in our notes,
Apologies.
we would never normally...
No, I must have mixed the names up, so apologies for that.
Thank you, Ms Rush. That's quite embarrassing. You know,
No,
it's amazing how often it happens that because you've got senator as your title, that people assume that you're a man.
My apologies, Ms Rush.
No problem. I know that will have happened to Senator Hume as well.
So Rebecca Rush, Assistant Secretary, Post and ACMA Branch.
Thank you very much. So, it's been a big day, but how would you say things at Australia Post are going?
Are you asking me to speculate on anything in particular?
Well, I guess clearly there's a lot of discontent about the conduct of senior executives in gift giving, etc. That's been of major debate. However,
You can ask questions of fact, but you can't ask.
no.
questions of
I was
opinions.
asked to characterise what's going on, but clearly I'm more interested in the postal obligations and your service obligations and how those are travelling in terms of community expectations, particularly in this time of change where the pattern of the postal service has been affected in terms of more parcels and people getting back into using mail, etc. That's the key issue here, and both the government and Australia Post should have that as their 100% focus. So, can I ask, how do you think things are going?
I can advise the committee that Australia Post has met all of its performance standards as reported in its annual report for 1920. So in terms of meeting its regulatory obligations, which is what the department oversights by the performance standards, they have met those standards.
Okay, and so that's things like letter delivery time.
That's correct, yep.
Etc. So what is the expected time for the delivery of a letter in Australia?
At the moment, they're subject to regulatory relief. Thank you, Richard. This is why I wanted that back. At the moment, the time for intra-state letters has changed, in addition to the suspension of the priority service. So it really depends on whether we're talking about delivery within a city or...
So how long for an interstate letter? So a letter from here in Canberra from this building to Perth, how long would that be?
That's interstate. That standard hasn't changed.
Okay, and what's that standard?
That's six business days after posting.
Okay, so is there any reason if I posted a letter to Perth that it should take nearly 10 business days to get there at the moment?
Certainly at the moment what we're seeing is difficulty in getting belly space in planes, essentially. And Australia Post is prioritising essential goods. So the reason that it would take longer would be because Australia Post has not been able to secure sufficient space in the belly of aircraft, and therefore we'll be looking at alternatives, for example, rail and even in some instances in regional and remote Australia it uses bus services as well.
Okay. Can I ask, so you can't, it's too expensive just to send a plane with just mail in it for Australia Post? It has to be supplemented with passengers, or...?
Australia Post, Senator, Australia Post has brought on board some additional capacity in aviation capacity, but I mean the point is that in a pre-COVID, the vast bulk of freight was carried on passenger aircraft. So they have been able to supplement some of that capacity at some significant additional cost to them, but they haven't been able to completely supplement or substitute for the loss of belly space in
Okay, so
passenger
is it
planes.
coming by rail or truck, or is it just waiting for the next plane?
That's a question you'd need to
Ask Australia Post. Okay. So I wanted to ask if you know how many delivery points a traditional postie covers and what size streaming gauge is used to allocate parcels to posties, and how many packets and parcel they carry a day.
That's definitely a question for Australia Post.
Okay. There's been some debate about, postal workers being dedicated exclusively to letters. Can I ask what the current delivery standard has been varied? What's the current delivery standard and what's the variation to it?
I'll read you through the by location. Mm-hmm. And this is noting that the priority service is suspended. So in the capital city of a state, it's gone from 3 business days to 5 business days, so that's 2 additional days. In another city or a town in a state, it's gone from 3 business days to 5 business days. In the capital city of a state, in a place within that state other than that capital city, it's gone from 4 business days to 5. In another city or a town in a state, in a place within that state other than that city or town or an adjacent city or town in that state, it's gone from 4 to 5 business days. And in a place in a state other than a place mentioned previously within that state, from 4 to 5. So the increases for intrastate are between 1 and 2 days.
Intrastate. And what if you're sending, say, something from Melbourne, Sydney or Canberra to a remote location like the Kimberley? The experience there is that the blowing out of time is blowing it out immensely all the way down the line. So if you're waiting you've got to wait for the intrastate, the interstate and then the remote mail, like the timelines are completely blowing out and people are waiting much longer than they would expect. How would you characterise those issues currently?
The Kimberley is a particular case in point, and I think that it's been subject to questioning, or Australia Post has been subject to questioning around the Kimberley, because a lot of mail is delivered by plane in that part of the world. But I can only reiterate, Senator, that Australia Post met all of its performance standards for the 1920 financial year.
And I think
is that with or without the variation?
The variations, that's an excellent question. Certainly the regulatory relief commenced on the 16th of May, and as we heard today, they're still rolling out their alternative delivery model. The priority service was suspended on 1st of June, so that gives them a bit more operational flexibility, as Mr Windier said earlier today. However, the bulk of that financial year was the previous standard, so before the temporary regulatory relief. Does that answer your question?
It does kind of, but what is the existing standard for those remote locations?
I'm sorry, could you say that again?
I guess what is the existing standard seems to already be quite generous in terms of allowing an extensive period of time to get things to remote locations.
Those standards didn't change, Senator. The standards that changed, as Ms Rush said, were intrastate only. And in terms of the experience, there is, as we were saying a minute ago, because of a number of impacts, in a sense, in other sectors, including aviation, the ability to deliver can be frustrated by those factors. But the standards were not changed.
I've had some questions now about the Australia Post board, please, and those appointments are made by government, is that right?
That's right. By the Governor-General on recommendation of the government.
From the Minister and they go through the cabinet. They're a cabinet process, aren't they?
Yeah.
Can I ask Mr Atkinson, is Mr Tony Nutt a current non-executive member of the Australia Post Board? He is a current member, I'm sorry. Is he a former director of the Liberal Party?
I believe that's a matter of public record. Yeah.
It's on the public
that's
record?
That's my understanding.
It's detailed in Australia Post's annual report, I think page 58 or 9.
Of the annual report?
Yep.
Okay. When the department was identifying potential candidates, was his inclusion as a nominee for the board suggested by the minister or his office?
I'd have to take that on notice unless you... I'd have to take that on notice, Senator.
What business experience did Mr Nutt bring to the board?
Once again, I'm sorry, I don't have his CV.
So you would otherwise be able to answer that? Is it your job to stick up and advocate for a Australia Post board that's stacked with Liberal Party members or former members, etc.?
Well, I think, Senator Pratt, that's an unreasonable expectation. I mean,
it's your job.
No. Well,
Senator
Tony Nutt,
Hume, isn't it?
Well, it's publicly available information. Tony Nutt is a highly skilled executive. He was a former chief of staff to prime ministers, and I know that you have former chiefs of staff to prime ministers that have gone on to greater things. You know, Don Russell, for instance, is the chairman of Australian Super, but he's had exactly the same professional experience as Tony Nutt.
Mr Bruce McIver, he's a current non-executive member of the Australia Post Board, a former director of the Liberal Party. So at the time when the department was identifying potential candidates, was the inclusion of Bruce McIver on your independent list, or did it come on the list by referral from the minister or his office?
I'd have to take that on notice too, Senator. Sorry, I just have a list of who's on the board.
You have a list of who's on the board?
It's Christine Holgate, Lucio de Bartolomeo, Andrew Staines, Deirdre Wilmot, Tony Nutt, Bruce McIver, Mario D'Orazio, Michael Ronaldson and Jan West.
You said Michael Ronaldson? Yeah. I'd like to know, please, of the current members of the board, which of them originated from a list within the department and those that were added by the minister's office?
I'll take that on notice across the list.
So Mr Michael Ronaldson, a current non-executive member of the Australia Post Board, is he a former director of the Liberal Party or...
Well, he's a former senator, and you know that. He was your colleague. He has great admiration for you.
I do, and I hope... and I have great admiration for him.
I'm sure he wishes you the best for your post-senatorial career as well, Senator Pratt.
Deirdre Wilmot, she's well known in Western Australia, but I didn't know that she was on the Australia Post board, and I certainly know her links to the Liberal Party. Was Ms Wilmot suggested by the Minister or his office?
Senator, I've agreed to take that question in relation to all of them on notice.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask the Chairman, Mr Lucio Di Bartolomeo and Mr Mario D'Orazio, have they ever donated to the Liberal Party?
I presume you're not asking me that.
Well, I guess it's a question for the department to know and the government to know whether they're satisfied with the level of transparency and independence of its board members. So I do expect you to be able to explain how the accountability of those relationships go. So you might know whether they have made donations individually or not, but what's the appropriate level of oversight for a board to behave in a politically independent manner?
I have some information which may be of help in terms of the process that the department goes through. Certainly the potential appointees are required, or directors are required, to go through a private interest declaration process. So that's one area. We also do a range of checks, like ASIC checks, for example, and directors, when appointed, undertake to update those private interests as a matter of course, if there should be anything that comes to the fore that may embarrass the government.
Okay. If you could take on notice, and I'm sure all of those members of the board have done, but if you can take on notice whether they all appropriately disclosed any past or present roles within the Liberal Party, I would be grateful to see if that was all appropriately disclosed. Thank you.
Certainly, Senator.
The CFO actually said exactly that today, didn't
Yeah, well,
he?
I'm glad to hear that. Sorry, I was absent this morning.
Yes. I actually think he said took it on notice that he would provide the register.
Okay, but it's you know, it's a question also of understanding that Australia Post has got appropriate oversight of that, but also that the government has appropriate oversight of that, because that register of interest is relevant not just to Australia Post's conduct, but it's also relevant to this department's oversight of Australia Post, is it not?
Yes, Senator. Obviously we have governance arrangements across how we work with Australia Post, which we can go into in more detail if you like.
Thank you. What's the nomination process for appointment to the Australia Post Board? Is it advertised? No. It's not advertised, ever?
There is no set process.
It doesn't
Senator.
have a set process at all, so when a vacancy pops up, the government makes a recommendation. How do you keep track, Mr Atkinson, of the pool of candidates who should be thought of? Are you asked to provide a list, or does the minister just create their own list?
Senator, it's different on different occasions. So we do keep pools of candidates for various board positions. I've already taken on notice what the approach was for all of the rest of these.
I'm interested to know what the general process is.
So the general can happen in a number of ways. The end of the process is that the minister makes a recommendation through cabinet processes, and cabinet makes a decision, and that gets transmitted to the Governor-General.
Okay. Who selects the pool of, who brings together the pool of candidates?
In the end, it's the minister's choice who the candidates are for this type of role.
Have you ever been asked to bring together a pool names, or has it always been driven by the minister's office when a vacancy comes up?
It can happen in a variety of ways, Senator. We, as the Secretary said, we have and have in the past been had pools of names. There are the Department of Finance has had pools of names available as a department with a shareholding interest in all the government business enterprises. There are a variety of sources from which names can ultimately be pooled.
Yeah, and so if the minister has names they would like to put forward, do they give them to you to put on a list, and then it comes back to the minister, or do you give the list to the minister and then the minister adds their own names and then it goes on from there? Clearly they've all got to be vetted according to the appropriate skills, etc.
Yeah, so
who does that?
There's a due diligence process, but the process. Sorry, just to clarify, the
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. You have questions, or are you complete?
No, I've got some material now, so I've
Senator
managed
Urquhart,
to
you have the
check
call.
it. So, can I just go back in relation to the strategic review, Mr Madsen. So the strategic review claims scenario 6. Oh, sorry, I'll just wait for you to come in the door.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, Mr Madsen, the strategic review claims scenario 6 that the multi-technology mix would cost $41 billion. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct, Senator.
Okay, and that's on page 17, I think you said earlier.
I'm reading it from page 17, yes.
Page 17, yes. The strategic review also claims scenario 1, a FTTP rollout would cost $72 billion. Is that correct?
I have 73, I think. 73.
I think that's on page 17, is that
Still on
right?
17, that's correct.
So you have 72?
No, I've got 73.
Oh, 73, apologies. So, Mr Madsen, is this where the Minister's $30 billion claim comes from? So it's a 7-year claim from a political document, so it's the rough difference between the 41 and the 73?
Senator,
Senator,
that was my understanding of what was said, is that it's that differential from that document where there was a side-by-side analysis of the two.
And I think, Senator, I also referred to the figures from NBN Co's 2016 corporate plan, which was published in 2015, which talked about a peak funding requirement for reverting to the fibre to the premises build from between $74 billion and $84 billion.
Okay, so that $30 billion is a rough difference between that 41 and 73. So, except I understand peak funding for the multi-technology mix does not cost $41 billion, does it? It was $49 billion, then 51, and now 57.
There's $49 billion of government equity and debt currently invested in the company, and there's $2 billion of private debt, which takes us to the $51 billion of current funding that's been expended.
Yeah. So the strategic review also claims scenario 2, which is a redesigned FTTP rollout, and that would cost $64 billion. Is that correct? I think that's on page 17.
That's correct.
So, Mr Madsen, what's 64 minus 57? 7, isn't it?
Senator, I think that we've fallen into the issue of comparing non-side-by-side numbers, because the 64 number is a 2013 number, I think, and
But what I'm saying is the $30 billion claim is complete bogus, isn't it?
Senator,
it's completely wrong.
Senator,
I think we took on notice earlier on to see if we could ascertain what the sources of the references by the Minister were, because we weren't certain. And Mr Madsen has pointed out there, in his view, two possibilities for those sources of that difference, one of which being the strategic review and the other of which being the corporate plan of 2015. And so I don't think... So, and it is not, we don't know the answer to precisely what the source was, and the 2015 document, I think, as Mr Madsen just pointed out, suggested a peak funding requirement of between $74 and $84 billion.
So, Mr Windeyer, the 2016 corporate plan is not a costing of the original Labor policy, was it?
It was as described by Mr Madsen earlier.
But it is not. No, I've asked you the question. It's not a costing of the original Labor policy.
I think, as Mr Madsen described it, it is a reversion. It is a cost
it is
of reverting.
not the costing of the original Labor policy, is it?
It's as described in the document.
It's a very easy question, Mr Windeyer. The 2016 corporate plan is not the costing of the original Labor policy, is it?
It's a costing of the reversion to a fibre to the premises rollout. That's what
it is.
Not
the costing of the original Labor policy.
No, it's a different costing. It's a costing of reverting to a fibre to the premises build.
Mr Windia, you've worked as a Liberal staffer.
I have, Senator.
Mr Madsen, you've worked as a Liberal staffer.
Senator, I have.
Mr Atkinson,
Yep.
you've worked as a Liberal staffer.
I haven't. Just about that.
Was that a yes, Mr Atkinson?
Yes, I'm a career public service who's worked for both sides of government over 20 years, and I've also worked as a Liberal staffer.
Now, can I go back to you, Mr Windia? The 2016 corporate plan is not the original Labor policy.
That's what I said a second ago, Senator. No, it's a costing of reversion to a fibre to the premises. The point I was trying to make, Senator, was solely that we're not sure what the source of those numbers are, and we've provided.
Yet the minister keeps going out there in press releases, in speeches. I'm happy to table these, quoting a $30 billion blowout.
I understand that,
from
and
us.
we've said we'll take on notice to see whether we can ascertain the source. But all we've done is refer to two possible sources.
In that case, we're happy to move to NBN Co.
Certainly,
Thank you to officers of the department. We will move to NBN Co. We might suspend for 1 minute just while we change over witnesses.
we can have a bonfire.